I was in the middle of preparing to move into our newly built house while juggling work. That day I finished work early and decided to stop by the new house before heading home. I was shocked to discover my husband Greg, who was meant to be looking for a job, was actually having an affair with another woman.
"Why don't we kick my wife out and live here together?"
Really? I'm so happy. So how do you plan to kick out your wife?
I was stunned by this unexpected turn of events. But I refused to let things go their way and called Greg's relatives. This is the new house. When I showed Greg's family the new place, guess what? Greg was there, hugging his mistress, Julia, with barely any clothes on. Seeing this, John, my father-in-law, got all angry, went running after my husband, and then my husband did something major that led to a totally unexpected outcome. Since I was young, it had been my dream to own my ideal home. I started saving diligently for my part-time jobs during my student days, working tirelessly to make this dream a reality. Once I graduated and got a diploma, I started working and got really caught up in it, so I didn't really think about dating much. When I turned 30, I met my husband, who also dreamt of owning a home, and we hit it off, thinking we could achieve our dreams faster together. We dated for about a year before getting married. Initially, we lived in a rented apartment, but after 5 years, it was finally time for our dream to become reality. When I was young, I always had a fuzzy idea of owning a home, but now I know exactly what I want. Both my grandparents and parents had always lived in rentals. I didn't feel too inconvenienced by it, but having to get approval for everything was a hassle. My parents used to say, "Any place you live becomes home." They didn't mind the restrictions of renting much, but the longer I lived, the more I wanted to improve things. I strongly felt that the only way to live in a house I could renovate freely was to own it. When I was going over those ideas with the home builder, they introduced me to a woman, Julia, around my age, who's now in charge. She was beautiful even from a woman's perspective, but didn't boast about it. Instead, she was a good listener and responded precisely and clearly to my questions. I felt very comfortable and confident in trusting her with the project. But there were times when my husband overly praised her, which made me start to feel suspicious about his actions. Julia, being praised by Greg, didn't even seem fazed by his compliments, almost like she felt sorry for him. As we were bringing our ideas to life in the house, we went way over our budget. The monthly mortgage payments became quite high. I thought about compromising, but since this was a once-in-a-lifetime purchase, I figured it would be better to just earn more rather than regret compromising later. Originally, I earned more than my husband, and since most of the ideas were mine, I decided I could bear the extra cost. Also, there was talk of a promotion, so it was certain that my income would increase. I requested that we proceed with the project despite being over our budget. When we decided to get married, my husband and I had discussed and set our priorities. The top priority was the house. We wanted to have a home that was close to what we wanted without giving up too much. We planned to continue working until the mortgage was paid off. And when it comes to having kids, our families will probably bring it up once we're married, but we'll talk about it when we're both ready. We were really looking forward to not having any kids in our marriage. That's why I didn't mind investing most of our earnings in the home. But this agreement we had would later collapse. After a while, my promotion was confirmed, and I became even more dedicated to my work. There were days when I couldn't go home early due to handling over responsibilities to my team members, and sometimes I had to work on weekends to keep up. My husband, having plenty of time with a 9-to-5 job and no overtime or weekend work, started taking over more of the discussions about the new house. We used to meet at Julia's office, but now she's always at our place acting like it's a meeting place as we finish the new house. "Did you have a meeting with Julia at our house today? Why can't you just go to her office instead?" "What did you guys talk about? How's the progress going?" I asked my husband many questions. To these he responded,
"We talked about the details and various things," refusing to elaborate further.
What does various things mean? I wanted to ask more, but since I had been too busy and left the new house matters to my husband, I felt guilty and couldn't press him further.
If it bothers you that much, why don't you take responsibility? He would say, ending the conversation.
Worried about being dismissed like that, I didn't pursue it further. But then an unbelievable situation developed. Without consulting me, my husband quit his job. One day, as the completion of our dream home was just around the corner, I noticed my husband was still lounging around the house when it was time to leave for work. I asked him, "Isn't it time for you to go to work?"
Work? I quit. It's inconvenient to commute from our new place, right? With your salary increase, we'll manage for now.
And without any remorse, he kept insisting his decision was right, smiling smugly. Are you out of your mind? We thoroughly considered the commute when choosing the location, right? You were the one who said it was okay that only local trains stopped there, and although it's a bit of a walk to the station, it's good for our health, right? My husband replied,
Is that so?
Which infuriated me, and I snapped back. Stop being ridiculous. I thought we could manage the extra spending because I was expecting my husband to make more money. Originally, we were supposed to achieve the dream of owning our home with both of us working. Why has it suddenly become just my earnings? Even if he had decided to quit his job, I wished he had discussed it with me first. After venting my frustrations, my husband, not fully grasping the gravity of the situation, asked if I was really that angry. Noticing my unresolved anger, he promised to find a new job within 2 months after we moved in, and we settled the matter on that note. But my distrust only grew deeper. Meanwhile, our long-awaited new home was finally completed. I meticulously customized and imported furniture from abroad, so I decided to fully move in only after everything had arrived. My husband wanted to choose a workplace that would be convenient to commute from our new home, so he frequently walked to the nearest station to explore options. But his job search was not going as well as expected. He wasn't home much because he spent most weekdays at the job center. From his behavior, I believed he was genuinely trying to find a job. I thought it would be better for him to find a stable job that he could keep until retirement, rather than rushing into something short-term. Since a promise is a promise, I decided to wait a little longer and see how things unfolded. One day, I was still forced to work on weekends. As I hurriedly got ready, my husband said he would take care of the household chores, for which I was thankful. It bothered me that he insisted on me leaving early for work, but it was good that he took over the morning chores, allowing me to leave for work with ease. For once, I finished work by early afternoon. I considered going straight home to rest, but thinking my husband would be relaxing by now, I didn't want to disturb him. Instead, I went to our new home to choose curtains, something I had been postponing. There were small windows, and I hadn't yet taken their measurements. My husband had already relaxed at the new home, but I hadn't experienced it yet. I thought it might be nice to eat a late lunch there. So I bought some snacks at the nearest station and arrived at our new home. I was gonna open the door, but weirdly, the lock was already open. What's going on? I grew anxious. I considered calling the police, but then remembered that I had recently installed something. Stepping away from the entrance, I recalled that there had been signs of someone entering our new home before. My new dresser was dirty, and I knew my husband occasionally went to the new home, so I asked him, but he denied bringing anyone there. I believed what my husband said, so I guessed that either robbers were checking things out or troublemakers were hanging around. I had installed security cameras, thinking it would be quicker to provide evidence to the police if something happened, as I couldn't handle it alone. With trembling hands, I took a deep breath to calm myself and checked the camera footage on my smartphone. I was definitely shocked. It wasn't a thief or pranksters. It was my husband cheating with another woman. I shuddered, thinking that all of his odd behavior and the gradual change in his personality were now connected. The betrayal hurt, but I was more dumbfounded than shocked. Thinking back, my husband had exhibited many inexplicable behaviors. Probably the traces of someone else in the house were also from a woman he had brought. The issue was the identity of the woman. Given his sudden resignation, I suspected she might be one of his coworkers. Her back was to the camera, so her face wasn't clear, but as my husband changed positions, her face began to intermittently show in the camera. I zoomed in on the woman's face for a better look and recognized her as Julia from the home builders company. The shock was overwhelming. I had respected and trusted her professionalism. They were both betraying me. Knowing that I trusted Julia, they had the audacity to deceive me. Had my husband aggressively pursued her, or vice versa? They were smirking behind my back, thinking they had successfully fooled me. My shock turned into anger, and I saved the footage. Determined to see this through, I continued watching. My husband was acting so out of character with her. It was like I didn't even know him. I was just so disgusted by their shameful behavior. Julia also shamelessly moaned loudly. After they satisfied themselves, my husband started discussing living together in this house with her. Hearing this, I wondered if he had already arranged to separate from me. I wasn't going to let him get the upper hand. It would be me, not my husband, who would bring up divorce. I had the right to do so. Convinced of this, I called my in-laws and rushed to a nearby hardware store. I bought plenty of tension rods at the hardware store and sealed all the windows and doors on the first floor. I thought they might notice because of the noise, but they were likely too engrossed in their passionate acts, as they were completely unaware of my presence or the noise outside. After securing the entrances with tension rods, my in-laws arrived. I had called them over suddenly, saying I wanted to show them the new house. They had been interested in our house since before construction started and responded quickly to my call. They were excited about the exterior of the new home. They wanted to see the interior soon, but I revealed the real reason I had called them here. I couldn't bring myself to say that my husband was currently in the midst of a passionate affair, so I showed them the saved camera footage instead. My mother-in-law Laura's face turned indescribable as she watched her son's affair. It must not have been pleasant for a mother to see her son behaving like a beast. It's not strange for an adult man to be intimate with a woman, but it's not pleasant for a parent to witness, especially since the partner was his mistress. John, also a man, was already shaking with rage. It seemed unforgivable for him as a father that his married son was having an affair. Laura's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, apologized to me. John looked ready to strike his stupid son immediately, his anger seeping through. He repeatedly apologized to me, his fists clenched so tightly that they seemed ready to bleed. My in-laws apologized again, but above all, they wanted to stop the ridiculous behavior immediately and charged into the house after removing the tension rods. When they barged in, my husband and the woman had just finished their second round of passion and seemed to be basking in the afterglow. My husband had just put on his underwear when his parents suddenly appeared, causing him to freeze. Julia screamed and hurriedly threw on some clothes, but although it was better than being naked, her appearance was still indecent. Regaining his senses from Julia's scream, my husband quickly finished putting on his pants and kept repeating,
"Why?"
in obvious confusion. He likely couldn't think of anything else to say. Seeing their reaction, I couldn't help but laugh. Julia tried to escape through a window, but she couldn't open it because I had secured it with tension rods from the house. She screamed hysterically.
"What's going on?"
My husband suggested they retreat to the second floor, and they took the opportunity to run upstairs while my in-laws chased after them. Surprisingly, John, who had been a track athlete in his student days and still ran for his health, caught up with them quickly. He forced open the door they were trying to close. In contrast, my husband hardly exercised at all. I thought to myself, Greg's parents have won this. But my stubborn husband and Julia retreated into a walk-in closet adjacent to the room and locked themselves in.
"Enough is enough. If you're going to run away, you shouldn't have had an affair in the first place." "Why did you do this? Aren't you ashamed? Come out."
My in-laws continued to scold my husband through the door, calling him shameless. "This is such a betrayal. I'm going to divorce you, and you will both pay me compensation." Then Julia blamed my husband, saying,
"You said we wouldn't get caught."
My husband replied,
"We'll talk about that later. Let's just try to escape now,"
showing he hadn't given up on fleeing. Despite my in-laws urging them to surrender, my husband kept saying they could escape through a window. However, Julia refused to jump from the second floor, fearing injury. My husband tried to convince her by mentioning the potential for having to pay damages, and eventually they both jumped out of the second floor window. A thud was heard, and when we checked from the upstairs room, we saw them crumpled on the ground, unable to move. Going outside, they were both complaining of pain. Julia's leg was bent at an odd angle. My in-laws suggested leaving them be as they deserved it for their actions. However, feeling a final bit of compassion, I called an ambulance. But it was quite a sight. My husband shirtless, and Julia just in underwear covered by my husband's shirt. I watched from a distance as they struggled to answer the emergency responders' questions due to the pain. The ambulance crew, accustomed to various emergencies, could likely guess the situation from their appearance. Later, I visited my husband in the hospital with a lawyer and my in-laws to discuss divorce and compensation. After he was taken to the hospital, they contacted me to bring his insurance card, but I didn't go. My in-laws went instead, but just left what was needed at the reception and returned. When I visited my husband's hospital room, he mistakenly thought he was forgiven and waved at me with a smile. But then my in-laws showed up, and a stranger who was pushing the mistress in a wheelchair appeared. To Greg, who's in shock, the person who was pushing the mistress's wheelchair introduced himself as the lawyer I had hired and handed him a business card, causing his face to instantly freeze. It seemed that he finally realized he had not been forgiven yet. I was astounded by how delusional he could be, wondering how he could think he'd be forgiven after everything that had happened. The lawyer calmly explained the necessities to both of them and advised my husband to agree to the divorce. He stated that my stance would not change even if he refused and it went to court. The lawyer emphasized the potential consequences of a court battle on my husband's social credibility and his impact on his re-employment prospects. Hearing this, my husband reluctantly agreed to the divorce in a subdued voice. When the topic of alimony came up, he also acquiesced without resistance. As for the mistress, she seemed utterly devoid of energy, appearing indifferent to everything around her. Although my husband seemed somewhat unhappy, he complied under the stern gaze of my in-laws. I was grateful that everything was proceeding smoothly despite his reluctance. Next, I demanded that he take responsibility for the already purchased furniture and the new home. I informed him that he needed to cover the down payment and the remaining mortgage as well. John, refusing to entertain any objections, glared menacingly, but it seemed my husband did not want to take over the house. He countered while visibly intimidated by his father's stern look.
This is no joke. Isn't the house mostly decorated according to your wishes? My preferences are minor. Why should I bear the entire cost? It's unfair.
I did not want to let go of the house filled with my dreams either. It was he who had orchestrated this situation, so I showed him the saved footage from the security camera. Do you really think I can calmly live in a place where you invited your mistress and acted indecently? How rotten is your brain? With anger and despair in my voice, the lawyer stated we were not willing to compromise and were prepared to fight as long as necessary. Laura broke down crying, lamenting that she never expected her son to be so merciless.
Are you going to make your wife and your mother cry? Man up and own up to your actions.
It seemed my husband could stand up to his father, and ultimately he was subdued by a single sentence from him and agreed to follow everything the lawyer said. Just when I thought everything was resolved, an unknown elderly couple entered my husband's hospital room. They were the parents of Julia, and upon seeing my in-laws, they immediately knelt and started apologizing profusely. Julia had caused great disrespect, and Greg had been injured. It turned out they had been looking for their daughter as she wasn't in her room. However, my in-laws seemed strangely agitated, not just because of their daughter's actions.
So it was your daughter all along. The nerve.
Since my husband's affair came to light, John has been constantly irritable and extremely angry. However, his current anger seems incomparable to anything before. When I asked Laura what was going on, she revealed that the parents of my husband's mistress were running a subcontracting company that worked for John's firm. The company run by the mistress's parents was known for its lax work ethic, frequently missing deadlines and delivering poor quality, which led to numerous complaints. Despite repeated warnings, there was no improvement, so my father-in-law had discussed ending their business relationship. However, being abandoned by John's company would lead the subcontracting firm to collapse and bankruptcy. They pleaded with him not to let go, citing the livelihoods of a few employees they were responsible for. Faced with the welfare of the employees, John, being a business owner himself, felt it was not easy to simply cut them off, under the condition that if there were any further issues, they would be abandoned. He continued to give them work out of conditional mercy.
Do you remember the promise? I said there wouldn't be a next time. We will never do business with your company again.
Upon hearing this from John, the mistress's parents pulled their daughter out of the wheelchair and forced her to kneel despite her inability to kneel properly due to her cast. They insisted, saying her future depended on this and that a broken bone was a minor issue. She must kneel properly and apologize. Despite their apologies, John had no intention of changing his decision, and the mistress's parents desperately pleaded for reconsideration. Forced to kneel by her parents, the mistress screamed in pain, fearing another break. A nurse, hearing the commotion, rushed over and separated the mistress and her parents. When reprimanded by the nurse for making an injured person perform such actions, the parents argued that their livelihood depended on it, making an even bigger scene. Unable to handle the situation alone, security was called to finally eject the mistress and her parents from the husband's hospital room. Raised by such irresponsible parents, could it be that the mistress had learned to be bold enough to steal another's husband? Seeing the attitude of the mistress's parents made me think so. Being in this hospital might lead to another encounter with the mistress's parents, and it seemed likely to cause more issues regarding John's company. Wanting to avoid such scenes, I vowed never to return to this hospital. As I no longer have anything to discuss with my husband, I informed them that any further communications should go through my lawyer and left the hospital. What happened next was relayed to me by my in-laws. Due to their daughter's affair with the son of a business partner, the mistress's parents were forced to disown her as their business faced termination. Apparently, after the day of the disturbance at the hospital, her parents did not come to visit her again. The injuries were less severe for my ex-husband, and he was discharged earlier than the mistress. My ex-husband wanted to stay at his parents' house until he found a job, but his father did not allow it. With no other choice, my ex-husband began living in the new house. The mistress, having nowhere else to go, moved in with him after being discharged. The mistress and my ex-husband, having no other residence but the costly new home, lived together more out of necessity than love, just until they found somewhere else. The mistress had planned to find her own place immediately after discharge, but upon returning to her job, she was faced with dismissal. In fact, they had wanted to fire her earlier, but could not do so while she was being treated for illness or injuries. They had simply been waiting for her to recover. The reason for her dismissal was due to issues caused by her involvement with a client. Caught off guard by her dismissal, the mistress had no choice but to rely on my ex-husband. Both now unemployed, they shared the goal of saving money to leave the house, yet they constantly blamed each other for their situation and struggled to save the necessary funds. Both eager to save money quickly and sell the expensive new home, they continued to blame each other for their predicaments, leading to constant arguments. I heard that my ex-husband was struggling with the mortgage payments, unable to save money, and his debt was spiraling out of control. Lately, there have been suspicious individuals lurking around the new home, seemingly monitoring my ex-husband and the mistress. It appears that my ex-husband has borrowed money from some very dubious sources. After the divorce, I received a significant amount of money through compensation. With my promotion as planned, I decided to reward myself by building the home of my dreams. I discovered a store that offered Scandinavian interiors, which I had long admired, and decided to build a home that would suit the furniture I found there. Planning out my dream home brings me so much joy. This time, nothing is going to stop me from making it a reality.